to you.
All right. Hey everyone, welcome back. Good to be here again after an hour. So this time I'm going to be talking about the other half of what I do. So last time we talked about lean product management. Now I'm going to be talking more about my work in UX and how we're applying different iterative skills to UX inside Agile teams and also design in general. So today I want to talk to you about measurable design. To start that off, also, I love Twitter, so if you want to tweet at me, @LucyJean, my Twitter handle's up here. Feel free, I won't be offended if you're on your phones. So to start things off, if I tell you to look at the sponsor hall and describe the design to me, what would you say? How would you describe the design?
Curvy.
Curvy, okay, that's a good one. What else?
It looks very Flash Gordon to me.
Flash Gordon, all right.
Opulent.
Opulent, that's a good one.
Imposing.
Imposing.
Elaborate.
Elaborate? What else? Grand. Okay. Great. Those are all really great words to describe design. And what I really want to do is focus on those words later in these talks. I'm going to come back to this. So remember, grand, opulent, Flash Gordon, very beautiful, elaborate design. So, second thing I want you to do is turn to each other and say, hi, introduce yourself. So turn to your neighbor, very quickly introduce yourself. It's really funny. When I ask people to do this in the US, they're like, hey, okay, what next? Goes much faster. Great. So in those few seconds that you were introducing yourself to your neighbor, you were forming a first impression of them. You were noticing subconsciously things about them, their voice, their appearance, who they are, how they talk, and you were making a snap judgment, whether you like it or not. So hopefully you all liked each other and you can get along later at the party. But the truth is, that's the same thing about products. It only takes a user 5 seconds to judge if they like your product or not. 5 seconds isn't really a long time. And that also includes landing pages, somebody coming to a landing page and deciding if they like it, if they want to sign up. They'll bill after 5 seconds if they don't like it. It also includes B2B products. As soon as you put something in front of somebody at a demo, they're making a snap judgment about it. And they're making a snap judgment about it. To give you some perspective, it's about the attention span of a goldfish. Now, those snap judgments are largely based off design. It's based off the design of your website and what it conveys to the user. Now, when we're talking about measurable design, the things that we're talking about is making sure that we're making a best first impression to really capture that perception of what we want to convey as fast as possible, and measuring that about our users so that we can improve it. But before we actually get into measurable design, we got to first take a step back and talk about what is design. Now, as you saw when we were talking about the concert hall, design is not just design. When we first look at the concert hall, we were saying stuff like it's beautiful, it's opulent, it's grand. Now that's one layer of design. That's the top layer. We usually see design as pretty, something that conveys something beautiful to us. But design has many, many layers to it. And great design is kind of a judgmental thing. There's a lot of debate over what makes great design. And if we think of it in just terms of pretty, there's a lot of different perceptions from different people. So first, let's talk about the different components of design. So if we look at Twitter, and I ask you what the design is on this, you might say stuff like, I don't like the colors, or I think the icons are a little weird. When we're talking about things like that, we're talking about the first layer of design, which is visual design. Visual design's objective is just to please. It's designed to be pleasing to people. It's about composition and color balances and making sure that it's on brand with your customers. And visual design is usually the first thing that we think of when we say design. And when you hire designers, you go, oh, just make it pretty, right? Well, visual design is not the only piece of design. There's also information architecture. Information architecture, their goal is to have the navigation be clear and intuitive to people. So when I look at your product, I want to be able to quickly know where I'm going and know where to search for things. So if you look at Twitter, I know that my profile is going to be up here on the left, I know my feed is going to be in the middle, and my advertisement's up here. And menus generally are on the top of the pages or the left-hand side of the pages on products that we go to. We know this, it's clear, it's intuitive. Now, the next layer of design is UI design, user interface design. It's how we interact with the website. So, user interface design really focuses on, is it concise? Does it work well across platforms? Does this user interface let people do what they need to do? So if I look here on Twitter, when I compose a tweet, when I'm typing into there, you know how when you put the @ symbol and things drop down to find people? That's the interface. That's how you interact with Twitter and put things onto it. Also, when I post a photo on Twitter, and it allows me to drop down and see it in my feed, that's a piece of the user interface. The next layer that we have for design, keeps going, is UX design, user experience design. And user experience design is more, can my users achieve a goal that they want to do? Is it clear to them that what they want to do is possible on here? And does it have all the elements they need to achieve that goal? So user experience design we usually see as wireframes, because it's stripping away that visual design, it's stripping away that interface pieces of it, and really focusing on the core components of, is what I need there. And last but not least, we have marketing design. Marketing design, the purpose is to convey a message to the user about what is your product and what is its goals. So when I land on a landing page, it's all about marketing design. It's about being beautiful, conveying a message, having people take an action very quickly. So each one of these designs are very distinct, and the way that we measure them is very distinct, which kind of baffles me, because a lot of us just lump designers into one person. We're like, okay, great, let's go hire a unicorn designer. And when you hear people talking about unicorn designers, those are people who can do everything. There's a lot of pieces to design, as you just saw, and there's a lot of different skill sets required to make each piece good. So we can't really just look for one person to do that all, because it's really hard to find somebody who's great at every single piece. Some people excel very well at the visual design, but they neglect the user experience, and vice versa. Me personally, I excel at user experience. I'm not great at visual design. It's very hard to find unicorns. So because each one of these requires a different skill set, they're very distinct things, and we measure them a little bit differently. If we also look here on the spectrum, we find that we judge these pieces of design very differently. So marketing design, it's very intuitive, it's very personal. If you ask somebody whether you like the marketing design or the visual design of something, it will vary from person to person, because it's based off their own experience and their own personal preferences, right? But as I go down this list and I get to IA design here, information architecture, and my UI, my UX, it gets more concrete. We can measure if these designs are good a little bit more analytically. We can tap into things like Google Analytics and really find out if they're great. Now, I'm not saying that we can't measure each pieces of this, we just measure them differently. And the thing is that we need to know how to measure each piece separately so that we can talk about measurable design. So, the thing about design is that we judge each piece, we judge design as a whole on whether it's good or not, but we need to start judging the pieces. And each piece can be judged in a different way. The object of design is to change a goal. If you want to say if design is good, a good design achieves a goal. It works towards a goal and it solves a problem for your user. So we need to start judging design based off that rather than if it's pretty. So first, to understand how to measure design, we need to understand the design process and where we can put these measurements in. So the design process usually looks something like this. So we start with an idea. So somewhere in the company, somebody comes up with an idea of what to build. It could be the product manager, it could be the CEO if you're in bigger companies, and they bring it to the designer and say, we want to build this. And the designer goes, okay, I am kind of figuring out what it could look like in my head. Then they're going to go out and start doing user research. So they're going to figure out who's the person using this, what are their likes, what are their dislikes, who are they as a person, when are they going to be using it, and doing some ethnographical research there too, hopefully. Then they're going to come back and they'll start wireframing it. We'll strip it down to the bare bones and make sure what's included is what people need to accomplish their goals. Then they'll start with the visual design. So they'll start making it pretty, they'll start making it beautiful, put the branding colors on it, put those icons in, make it great. They'll ship it off to the developer's end to start coding it on the front end and the back end. And eventually, we'll launch it out to the customers. And at the end of the day, we hope we have happy customers. That's how we see the design process. We see it, and that's how we plan for design process too, right? So this is how we schedule it into our processes and how we schedule it into our teams. We see design as a one-off thing that gets, and when it's launched, it's done. That's how we judge when design is done, when it gets over to this piece. But what happens here? What happens when we launch it out to users and they don't like it? Well, first of all, a lot of times we don't know if users even like it because we're not tracking anything. So if we never go back and start questioning them on whether they like it and how they're using it, how would we know? And that's why we need measurements. But also, when we find out that users don't like it, we rarely go back and actually fix it because it is a one-way process. So we need to take a step back and realize that design is actually a series of decisions about how you're going to make your product. Each part of this process, you're making a decision about your product and about what you think the user will interact with it. So each kind of pixel that you put down in a design, or each place that you want to place a button, is a decision that you're making for your user to take an action. And we need to start recognizing it that way. And we need to know that design is not actually one way. In order to affect change, we can't have a one-way process. And in order to improve our designs, we can't have a one-way process. So we need to take a step back, realize this is not happening, and start treating our designs differently. We need to treat them as a hypothesis, because a design is really a test. When you're making that decision, you're making a hypothesis that this is actually what your users want, but you don't know it for sure. So, like any good test, we know we have to go back, get some inputs, and tweak it a little bit the next time we put it out. So design is actually a loop process, right? So when we're working in sprints, when we're working with teams, we need to be making sure that we're getting feedback and iterating on these things to make them better. So throughout the design process, at every single phase, we should be trying to get things out in front of customers and getting their feedback so we can make tweaks to them. And then we continue with this loop and feedback into it. So once we have done our wireframes, our visual design, our code, we got feedback throughout all this process, and we know that our users respond to it and achieve their goals like we want them to, then we launch it out to customers. Then we build the whole thing, but not until then. So design isn't done until it actually achieves its goal. So then's when the users are actually going to be happy, we hope. So now these are tiny loops too. And what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about going through the entire process at once. I'm saying make something small, make a prototype, get it out in front of customers. Make sure you get feedback as fast as possible. And once we keep looping through that, we're measuring at each one of these phases whether our users like it or not. The way we measure is both quantitative and qualitative. When I talk about measurable design, a lot of people think I'm only talking about quantitative stuff. I'm only talking about Google Analytics and getting those metrics. But we need a good system of both quantitative and qualitative metrics to feed into each other to make our designs great. So quantitative metrics. Quantitative metrics are great for figuring out where we are and where we want to go. So when we're looking at quantitative metrics, we're noticing trends, we're measuring against our KPIs. So for example, if we're looking for a quantitative goal, it could be 50% of our users log in only once a week, or 43% of our users do not complete checkout, or 76% of our users do not return after their first use. These are quantitative metrics that we can take steps towards to improve, things that we want to improve. Now, there's a problem with relying only on quantitative metrics. The problem with that is that they can't tell you why those things are so. So I know that 50% of my users are only logging in once a week, but why? You can't get that information unless you resort to going back to the qualitative and getting more information straight from your source, which are your users. So to give you an example of this, I was building a company last year in Italy called FlowSpot. And at the beginning of this company, we were trying to interview at least 100 people on how they shop, because our goal was to put reviews on websites that were that were a little bit more than the reviews that you would find on Amazon or typically anywhere else. And a lot of the websites in Italy actually didn't have reviews, so they were losing money from that. So what we wanted to do was first start with the users and figure out what makes them buy things and what kinds of reviews do they respond to. So we started calling people, we started getting on the phone with them, and a lot of our users weren't readily accessible to us in the area, so we had to call them. We called about 30 people, we spent 30 minutes to an hour with them each, and it was exhausting. We were like, oh God, I don't want to talk to anybody ever again. I just want to go sit in my room and like cry. But at the end of those 30 people, we said, you know what, this is kind of a waste of time. We can do this faster. Let's just put some Google Analytics on the site and start tracking this numerically, right? Well, what we found is after a week's time, we had all these great numbers on how people were coming to our landing page and what they were interacting with, but we had no clue why they were there. We didn't know who the people were who were coming to our landing page. We didn't know why they were coming to our landing page. We didn't know why they were clicking on some images and not the other ones. And we just didn't have the information we wanted to. So we went back and we started interviewing again. And we found out that in that amount of time where we were just taking metrics, and we did it the next week, another week of talking to people, we found out way more by talking to people than we did by just collecting metrics. So it's really important to have a balance of both and start talking to users. Because numbers can't give you information like this. If I see a user looking at my site like that, I'm gonna be like, oh, something's wrong. What did I do wrong? I'm gonna be looking for where are they getting frustrated? Where are they being concerned? What are they having trouble with? And I can't get that information just from straight up metrics. So I gotta look at the qualitative too. Qualitative information tells us stuff about behavior, about emotions, about habits of our users. So they give us meaning of the numbers. They tell us what the numbers actually mean. So those 50% of people who log in only once a week, well, they only need the data from our site once a week to do their job. So how do we change our process or our product to compete with that? Those 43% of the users who can't check out, they're really confused because we're putting our billing address on the wrong page. They think that they're done and they don't complete checkout. So let's go back and revisit our UX and make the improvements there. Or those 76% of people who bailed on our website, well, they just couldn't find what they were looking for. So maybe we have to take that information and put it more up front. Maybe we have an information architecture problem that we should discuss. Looking into this qualitative stuff can really tell you about which pieces of design you can use to solve users' problems. So my point is that metrics are not a replacement for user research. When I say measurable design, people automatically go, let's put numbers on everything. We don't need designers. We can just do this ourselves. But it's not true, because there are some fuzzy pieces of design. There's that intuitive pieces of design that you can't learn by just looking at numbers, and that design professionals can help you with too. So we need to make sure that we're doing both things. When I talk about measurable design, I'm talking about design judged on qualitative and quantitative measurements that determines if it achieves a goal. Because at the end of the day, that is what design is for, achieving goals with users. So, to look at how we can put this into practice and the process that we can achieve measurable design with, I'm going to tell you a story. So how many people were in my last session? Okay, a lot of people. So I was talking about this e-commerce site where we had celebrity sellers who were selling products on our site, and consumers would come on, follow the sellers, and buy the things from them. So these sellers didn't have a way to really track what products they were selling on their site. The way that they found out how much money they were making and what they were selling is they picked up the phone and they called these people at our company called producers, and they said, how much money did I make last week? And this got really annoying because we had over 100 sellers on our site at one point, and we had like 5 producers picking up the phone. So we had to make a way for them to remain interactive and figure out the questions that they were asking these producers themselves. So we wanted to build them a portal. So we ended up building them a portal. We spec'd it out. I was the product manager on this. We spec'd this out. We built them a very elaborate portal with all the questions they could possibly imagine answered on it. So we had a place for them to talk to their users. We had a place for them in the dashboard to go and find out how much money they made, what products were on sale. We had a place for them to share their products. So we built this really elaborate portal and we shipped it out to them. But when we went back and we started looking at our Google Analytics, we found out that they were barely using it. And the calls that the producers were getting never went down. So we knew something was wrong. We knew they weren't using it for a reason, but we had to go figure out why they weren't using it. So we started getting into this design process of really figuring out what was the underlying problem. And that process is really looking at what is our goal, who is our customer, what is the problem that they have, what are the challenges they have for attaining that goal, what small step can we take to fix it, and how do we measure success? This is how we should plan for design instead of just jumping in and designing things to make them look pretty. So let's start with what is our goal. When we're looking at what is our goal, we really want to define one clear goal for our users. So we want to make sure that there's an objective for them at the end of the day. Because what happens when there is not an objective or a goal that you're designing for? Well, then you get sites like this. This is Virgin America. Has anybody heard about Virgin America's new launch? Yeah, so everybody lauded Virgin America's beautiful new launch because it's flat design and it looks really, really modern. But what's the goal for people booking airline tickets? What's one of their goals?
Make it easier.
What?
Get a ticket.
Get a ticket, right? And what else would I be concerned with buying a ticket?
Price.
Price. Where's the price on this page? Right? I'm buying a ticket and I just chose my 7 a.m. flight over here. Oh, I'm paying $462. Oh wait, no, I'm paying plus $462? No, I'm supposed to, what am I supposed to do? So the thing about Virgin's site is they just didn't pay attention to what users actually wanted to do on here. And they hit the price, which you can't even see because it's all the way up here, and I couldn't see it either when it's on my browser. All the way up here it says it's $702, right? I can't see it anywhere else. Then when I go to choose my ticket, normally I would look for a seat. I'm like, okay, this seat looks good. I know first class is gonna be up there somewhere, so I'm gonna choose like this. No, but this is $30 more in here. How can anybody see that? So Virgin America, when they rebranded this, they did what a lot of companies do. They said, let's follow typical design, which is not typical design. Let's follow this new trendy design of flat design and release a cool site for people to play with. But they did absolutely nothing to look at user experience here. So they made a really mediocre site for achieving goals, which is to get an airline ticket at a good price. They made it good for people who want to spend a lot of money on airline tickets, but not for the majority of users. So I really doubt that they actually did any user research on this or testing at all. So we want to make sure that we're not those people who are arbitrarily building things just because they're cool or trendy or designing them in that way. We want to make sure that we're actually solving problems and achieving a goal. So instead of doing it like this, we start to look at our metrics. We start to look at Google Analytics, Optimizely, KISS metrics, and figure out where can we make the tweaks or what are the problems that we have in our goals to achieve it. For example, if I'm pulling down Google Analytics, I might be looking at events on there. Has anybody used events on Google Analytics? Okay, 3 people. So events on Google Analytics are much better than page views. It depends on what you want to learn, but events allow you to track actions. So if you really want to see if somebody is clicking on a button on your product, or they're sending an email or they're taking action, you put events around them, which is a little bit of JavaScript code, so that you can track those things. And you can start making funnels for your users to see where they're falling off. For example, if you have people signing up, you can follow them through the site on the sign up and see where they drop off. So if they're dropping off on the second page, you know there's too much work there, or you have to do something between the second and the third page to increase signups. Those are the types of goals that we're looking for when we're talking about setting our KPIs for these things. So we would take a look over these metrics. We would figure out what can we increase, what should we achieve for our users. So if we look at the e-commerce site I was talking about, we need to increase usage by the sellers. We had this problem where they just were not coming back. They were not coming back and logging into our site and looking at the information that we had there for them. So we had to figure out, how do we get that? How do we increase that for them? So the next step of this was to go figure out who are our customers, to do some research with them and make sure we had a firm understanding. So who usually ends up judging design in the design process? If you were working at a company, right, who do you have to show your designs to get them approved? Management.
Me.
Yes. You have to, usually, it's managers who are approving these designs. The management team, your boss, anybody, they'll be like, okay, that's good. But are they your users? Are they the people at the end of the day who are really using this and making the judgment at the end of the day whether to keep using it or not? Not usually. So it's really important that we understand who our users are so that we actually design for our users and we get them to approve our designs. And that's why it's really important to align the team around user personas and empathy maps. User personas and empathy maps allow you to communicate to your team who your user is. It allows you to refer back to them and say, hey management, I know you're approving this, but this is our user. You're very different people. Like you're a 60-year-old man, she's a 20-year-old woman. It's just not the same. You're gonna have different opinions. So we really wanna make sure that we're aligning our team around that and with a firm understanding of our users so that we can build the right things for them. The way that we get this information though is through user research. So one thing about personas and empathy maps, people usually just make them one time and then they're done. They're like, okay, I have a persona, I'm done. as you learn more about your users and you constantly do user research, you should be updating your user personas to reflect those people more accurately. They're not just one-off and done. If you learn more about people, you got to put that information back in it so you can keep updating and enhancing them. So we got to go out, we have to do user research, we have to learn more about our customers, and we feed that back into our empathy maps and our personas so that we have a firm foundation with them. Because designing without knowing who your user is, what their preferences are, what they like, what they do, means that you're just designing blind. So we really need to make sure that we understand who our users are. So our users for the e-commerce site were celebrities. And by talking to them and sitting with them and figuring out how they were using our website or when they were calling people, we were able to find out that they were short on time. So they couldn't figure out this very dense website that we built for them. We also found out they weren't very tech savvy. A lot of these people had assistants sending emails for them. They had people scheduling stuff. They knew how to open up their iPhones pretty much, and that was it. They could go to Twitter and they could tweet. So we had to make something that was very intuitive to them, and we failed at that the first time. So once we know who our users are, we can start exploring what are their problems. Now we're at the phase where we have a goal, we know who our users are, and we have to figure out what is preventing them from achieving that goal? What are the challenges standing in the way right now from them getting to that goal or achieving it like we want them to? So at this point, we have to kind of play doctor. So we have to play a doctor and figure out what is the cause of these symptoms, right? A lot of times we just find out that something's wrong and we jump right to the symptoms and we say, oh, it's bad design, so I'm going to make it look prettier. But we don't really look at the root causes of what's preventing people from achieving these goals. We just slap some stuff on it. So we have to do some diagnostic tests here to figure out what is the real problem preventing people from achieving that goal. So we're going to do a very quick exercise called the 5-second test. And this kind of illustrates what we did at the beginning too, where you introduced yourself. So the 5-second test I love for everybody because you can really find out very quickly if your goal and your designs are intuitive enough for people. So what you're going to do is look at the screen for 5 seconds and tell me what is this page about and what are you supposed to do next, okay? Stop. That was fast, right? It was fast, I counted. It might have been a little bit less. I'll count better. Okay, so what was that page about?
Venture capital.
Something to do with venture capital. Great.
Sign up for free.
Sign up for free.
It's an information database for VCs, is it?
Okay, information database for VCs, yep. So this is a venture capital database. CV Insights helps you track the world's most promising private companies, their investors, their acquirers, and their industries that can be in to help you innovate faster, and you can sign up for free. Anybody not get that from 5 seconds? Okay, yeah. So the problem with this page is that there's just way too much information on it, right? So by doing a 5-second test, when you told me that the only thing you could remember was venture capitalists, a lot of you said venture capitalists, right? I know that my things stood out up there, but that was it. So if I was doing this 5-second test in real life, I would try to limit the information and make sure that my pitch was incredibly clear and very concise here. And maybe tone down the sign up for free just a little bit, because that's huge. And it's a little distracting, right? That's exactly where your eyes go first, but you still need to convey your message. All right, next one. Ready? Okay, what does that say to you?
Well, I saw the word fascism and like all my
Yeah, and everything went away, right?
It's fashion or something, but what are those?
Okay, some kind of fashion site.
It's lookbooks.
Lookbooks, did you say? Yeah, lookbooks.
Create a bunch of lookbooks, fashion lookbooks.
I don't actually know. We're gonna go back and find out. So, yes, you can post, okay, so, no, I know what this site is. So, this site, you post a photo, you ask somebody a question, and then you get advice on whether you like it or not. Anybody get that out of here? No, right? It's just, nobody knows what's going on when you show this. But knowing that, I would know my message is really not conveyed on what's going on, and I would change the top of this completely. I would make sure that people would know this is an advice-seeking site on fashion from the community. Okay, next one. Ready? Okay, what was that site?
Cheap flights.
Cheap flights. What are you supposed to do? Book one, exactly. This is super intuitive, right? If I know I go here, I know I can start typing in my from, my to, I know why I'm on the page, I'm looking for a flight. Super intuitive. And since you guys all got it in 5 seconds, I would know that I achieved my goal here and my users were able to keep going and book a flight. So these are really good ways to diagnose problems. This is a really fast way that anybody can do it. If you're working on a product, just throw it up in front of your user, throw it up in front of your friends or your family and just ask, do you get it? You know, is my message clear? This helps us diagnose problems, and this is just one tool to use. So for our problem with the e-commerce site that we had with our sellers is we had a navigation problem and we had a medium problem. So our navigation problem was that they couldn't find what they needed right away. So it was faster for them to pick up the phone and call the producer and get the information. And they wanted to know stuff like, how much money was I making? That was their biggest thing. They just wanted to know how much money were they making. Is my time worth it? And we had a medium problem. These people were always on the go. So they had very time limited, but they were always on their phones. So by putting things on their phones, we were able to tap into it a little bit more. So we knew that we had these two problems. So we could use a combination of information architecture, user experience design, user interface design to really tap into it and solve it. So once we know the problem, we take a small step to fixing it and to achieving our goal. Now it's really important that we take small steps when we're talking about design. A lot of times people just want to jump in and do complete design overhauls. They're like, this is terrible, we got to change everything. But the problem is when you batch things that large and you do complete design overhauls, you're not sure what is making a difference when you go and you measure the changes. If you change too many things at once, you have no clear way of saying, I know changing that button changed it, or I know changing this page changed it. There's no way to measure it. So we really need to make small steps towards achieving our goal. One of the ways I like to get things in front of users to see if those steps make sense too is by using kind of a simulated experience on the websites. So this is something called Envision App. And Envision App, I can upload all of my designs right after I make them in Illustrator, no matter what they look like, and get them in front of our users. And I can hotspot things like this read more link to take them to another page that looks like a design. So I allow my users to click through these things as if they were experiencing the website and give me feedback quickly. So I can see if I make small little tweaks to my website, will it change it before we even start coding? So this is a fast way to get feedback and make those small measured changes. So for our e-commerce site and the sellers, the first step that we wanted to take was really looking at the information hierarchy, how we presented it on that site. That was our biggest problem, right? These people wanted to know how much money they were making, and we weren't telling them. So what we did was go back to the site, and we made the first page really big. This is how much money you're making, right? So this is just a quick wireframe from it. We changed it so that they weren't coming in the comments anymore like you saw on the first page. They were coming into the dashboard. And right there it hit them and it said, that's how much you made this month, that's how much you made for the year. So we put that test out first, just flipping those pages, and we measured it. And we saw more people logging in constantly. They wanted to see how much money they were making, and they were really happy. So now that we took that step and improved it, we took the next step, which is really tackling the medium. Now the medium was that they were always on the go. So they didn't have time to really log in and go onto this app on their desktop all the time and monitor things. So the first thing we did was just make it responsive. We didn't change everything and make a mobile app. We just made it responsive so that they can pull these things up on their phone very quickly and go through them and do the actions that we needed them to do. So doing that really increased our goal, and we were able to see a lot of success from it. The last piece is, how do we measure success? And when we're talking about design, there's usually a lot of different ways we'll say, how is it successful? And usually when we just ship it and we see that it's beautiful, we say it's done, it's successful, right? But that's not just it. We measured its success for this one because we saw a decrease in staff time. That was one of our big goals, right? We had a lot of these sellers calling up and trying to get these producers on the phone. It was taking so much time away from them doing their other pieces of their work. So we saw a decrease in staff time and we saw an increase in usage. And when we saw those metrics there, we knew that we were actually successful. That's how we measure success. So, and if we don't reach those immediately, we keep sprinting. We keep making small measured changes into our agile process. Now these processes should be formed in sprints. along with your teams. So when you're sitting there and planning on what you're going to work on, you need a plan for design as well in your agile sprints and start them off with that. It shouldn't be two separate things. You need to be working together with your designers to figure out what changes can we release to customers as fast as possible to get feedback. So, and getting feedback is really an important piece because we want to know if it solves a problem for users, because design should be functional. As we looked at this concert hall at the beginning, this concert hall, we said, it's beautiful, it's ornate, right? It's gorgeous. A lot of these things I'm trying to remember. Well, the one thing about this design is it's functional, right? So they didn't just build these because they were beautiful. It carries sound. They did it in a way that looks beautiful, but it carries sound and it amplifies what the concert is actually playing down here to all the people in the audience. It's a very functional design that achieves the goal of giving everybody the best experience. And that's what we really, really want from our products. Because in the end, how you measure good design solves a problem for your users. That's how we can really say design is done. Design is done when it solves a problem for our users and we achieve our goal. You only get one impression to do it, 5 seconds, so make sure it's good. Okay, that's it. Thanks for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Melissa. We do have 5 minutes for questions if you'd like to ask any.
Question for you. When a team is deploying a new feature, so this thing is literally, you could never do this before and now you can, how do you then put a measure in for the design quality that should be applied to that new feature? So before I couldn't copy and paste, now I can copy and paste. Does it really matter that I can copy and paste better or less than if I'd spend 50% more time investing in design? That's a very cynical point of view. Just
No, I see what you're saying though. So with something like that, you're facing both the subjective about how beautiful the copy and paste should be, but you also have this objective piece too, right? Which is about getting to a goal. So for me, and what I think we should really focus on is that when design solves a goal, when people enjoy it and are starting to use it, we can say it's finished at that point. Until it stops solving a goal and we have to go back and keep fixing it. So for features, this is why you need design professionals too, and you can't just say, let's slap some Google Analytics on it and have it work. You need to be able to judge, does it meet my goal enough and is it good enough for right now? And then you can revisit it later if it's not. So it should meet your brand and it should also meet the goal. That's how I find out that it's done and it's high enough quality.
Yeah, I work in desktop software. Actually, it's in mostly in the engineering sector, and our products are running often in an internet disconnected environment with users who tend to be twitchy about phoning home, to say the least. In that environment, as opposed to in the web environment you've been talking about or focusing mostly on, how would you change things? What would you do differently?
So it's a desktop. Can you explain that?
It's a product that's running in, say in a factory, or on a boat. Maybe no connectivity.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not happy about it sending information back. Maybe they are. Maybe they are, but you have to provide an option to turn it off, and most of them turn it off, which happens with Eclipse, the Eclipse data collector a lot.
Okay.
So you haven't got analytics that's reliable at all.
Okay.
You've got patchy information. You've got emails and complaints and occasional phone calls. What would you do differently?
What can I do differently? If I don't have hardcore analytics, so I would figure out what don't I know and what do I need to know in order to achieve the goal and figure out where to improve. And the first step I would do in that situation is really try to get in front of the users and take some analytics that way. So observing them and their behavior if you can. So looking at what do I have so far and where should I start trying to figure out what's better. If I have a bunch of complaints, what's my highest complaint? Like where should I start in that piece and keep going? So when you don't have the measurements readily available in like Google Analytics, and this is what people should have done before we had Google Analytics and it was really easy, you want to go to the source as fast as possible and you want to observe. So we used to rely more on ethnographical research in those cases where we have just observed people in their natural state and see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. You kind of want to blend into the background and let them go and observe it and then start manually counting. What are they doing? What actions are they not doing? So you can learn from it and feed it back into it.
So you almost need to find typical customers and jump in and go there.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's why it's really important. Like Google Analytics lets us take a step back where we don't have to be watching everybody's move, which is great. But it also sometimes teaches people, like people get it into their head, like I got Google Analytics, so I don't need to go talk to the customers. And that's not true because of the why piece too. And before we did have to go to the customers.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Off subject, do you really like cats?
It's an internet
This is
thing.
my New York City cat because he's so fierce, right? So the story about the cats was my first talk I ever did was last year at Lean UX NYC, and I started putting random memes into my presentation because it was like a fast 20-minute talk. And I was like, I'm just gonna make this ridiculous. So I had a bunch of like lolcats in it, and people went nuts. They were like, oh my god, this cat is great. And they were like tweeting these pictures, and it went viral, and I was like, oh, okay, people like cats. So I started gradually increasing the cat quantity in my slides and like gauging reactions to them. And I like it because it gives everybody a little bit of a chuckle when it comes up on the screen. So it keeps the mood a lot lighter.
It was interesting that on one of your slides you said 50% of the dropout before checkout, which is quite high, very high.
Yeah.
We're developing a new product at the moment, but a lot of the studies that we've done is actually directly with the user from conception right through, well, almost through the delivery. And one of the things we've done is filmed our users and done all the hotspots and all that kind of stuff, and looking at eye tracking.
Yeah.
However, my only concern is that do you think that is good enough for a pre-product launch in order to sort of like not get such a high dropout at kind of 50% is quite high. That would be a fear for me if we launch and then the product's just gone pear-shaped.
Have you sat in front of customers and watched them
Yeah.
check out? And do they get confused?
What we've learned from that, because we just take that feedback back into our stories and we adjust all along, but my only concern is that we're targeting a very small cross-section of our customers, and when we go to launch, it's going to be a national thing, but it's just wondering whether that's, a small section, a cross-section is enough to sort of like avoid that kind of dropout.
I think it's, it depends on how much of a percentage that is of your typical people coming too. So if it's something like 0.5% of people that you're testing with, you might not be capturing the whole audience.
Yeah.
So the things I would be concerned about with there, it sounds like you're doing the right thing, first of all. Like, I think that's what you should be doing. You should be testing it with people before you launch and make sure it's straightforward to them. But you also want to make sure that you have a good range of your typical users. So if you have many different personas of people who might be using this site, you want to make sure that your test subjects are representative of those personas.
How do you focus that down to take the best elements of that forward to make sure they are the best elements, and obviously they make the site a lot better than what it could do?
The elements of the people or the
if you've got a
design?
broad range of your customers, which we will have, and they would go to our new service that we're going to do for different reasons. But if we take all that information from them, you're going to get some people saying, yeah, I really want this, and other people saying, I really want that. We can't give it all of them
Yeah.
the functionality.
So that's the trick too, because users will be like, I want this, I want that, I want that. Yeah, so it's not necessarily about what users want. They're going to request like a whole slew of features. It's just, can they get to the action that they need to do? Like, people always want something, but if they're still going to check out, they're still going to check out. So it's important to differentiate between those wants that people are asking for and the actual needs. Because when you ask people, you want to make sure that you're also, during these sessions, asking like very directed questions that are not leading. Like, so stuff about, is it intuitive? Does this make sense to you? Perform these actions and let me watch you. You don't want to ask them stuff like, what would you want on this page? Because they're always going to come up with an answer. So you really want to observe them rather than be like, what else do I need? Or something. And you want them to be in the act of saying, I can't find this. I'm looking for this. Oh, where is this? This is on all the other checkout pages. I can't find it. Those things, you're like, that's a need. I have to add that. But if somebody checked out completely fine, and then at the end you say, what else would you need? And they're like, oh, could use this. That's going to be a differentiating factor. And it could be marked as like a nice to have for the future.
It kind of strikes me that, I'm not really in the web e-commerce world at all, but it strikes me that there's a lot what you're saying, what I just heard, a lot of people reinventing the wheel here.
Yeah.
That, you know, there must be a known way to do a checkout that everybody has studied and knows how it works. Or
This is a
and
good
or
time.
airline booking.
Yep.
That, like that fly.com used to show us that everybody instantly knew.
Yeah.
So Virgin one didn't. I mean, surely this stuff is
Yeah.
been around for long enough that people shouldn't be have to be researching themselves anymore.
So there is a guy named Brian Kama who's my good friend, and he lives in New York. He was the head of UX at Zappos, and he was my mentor when I was making that startup. And Brian gave a talk at a UX workshop that I was doing, and he said something about how best practices might be best practices for some people, but not necessarily everybody, right? Everybody's users are different, and everybody's products are different. And there are some best practices where you shouldn't reinvent the wheel. So if you're not trying to innovate on a certain piece of your platform and you just kind of gotta get it in there for it to work, then you can resort to best practices and start looking at things. Like a checkout, for example. A checkout achieves one goal, and it's to get people to check out. If you're gonna make a whole system, though, that is innovative and really kind of changing the way you wanna check out, then maybe you don't resort to best practices. Maybe then you wanna start being a little bit more iterative and innovative with what you're coming out with. So you kind of have to.
95% of people are just doing a checkout, right?
Yeah. So I mean, for checkouts.
Innovation
yeah.
is in the business, not in the.
Well,
the
unless
way that
you're building a new product, for example, a new startup that does checkouts differently.
Yeah.
So then you would want to do something a little different.
That changes over time, right? So where mobile devices are picking up more, you
Yeah.
might want to design something that transitions from a desktop to a mobile device really nicely,
Exactly.
and then all of your best practices are out the window because where do you start with that?
That's exactly like the trade-offs you have to look for. So I thought that was a good way to judge. Like take as much best practices as you can, but if you are trying to differentiate yourself from somebody else and really standing out in that area, that's where you might want to be a little bit more creative and spend more time doing your user research. Otherwise, take from what has been proven, as long as it's been proven. Some people put things yeah, you know what, I was gonna write these slides, but then I decided not to. Go back on. Best practices. Flat design, I hate flat design. Flat design is now being seen as this like best practice by people, right? So Airbnb went and spent tons of money rebranding themselves to be flat design, but what purpose does this actually serve, right? So I actually think the website looks worse now because it took me forever to figure out where to type in these things because they weren't as intuitive as they were before. So we need to be a little bit careful about how we're treating best practices or what we're calling best practices, because are they actually achieving a goal, or are they something that Apple came up with and they were like, Johnny Ives, here, everybody go use it. Because remember when the iPhone came out, everybody was so mad about the icons. They were like, this sucks. But now we're like, it's okay because it's Apple. Right? So that's how things sometimes become best practices or become really trendy. So we need to be a little bit careful about what we judge for that too. Here's another one. We're putting all these videos on landing pages, but they don't load on my computer. So if I'm your typical user, what am I seeing, right? I really hate these landing pages. So every single Adrian's like, yes, I do too.
Just like every time I've tested video versus not video landing page, not video landing page wins.
Yeah, they're
every
not,
single time.
But they're becoming trendy, and I've seen it. Like I've seen a lot of people, even like UX professionals, coming in and dropping these things on landing pages because they're fun, they're engaging. But right now our browsers can't support them. Maybe one time we will be able to load these and they'll load in 2 seconds and it'll be very quick. But if you're not getting people what they need immediately, how is that a best practice?
So that's got to be the start of the journey, hasn't it, to go into the rest of the product or the website. Like,
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the first thing a user sees when you get to your page. I went through something, I went through the UX Awards website, and every single one that won an award had a video on it, and none of them loaded on my site. And I said, how did this win? How did people see these? So it's really careful you have to be really careful about differentiating between them. Any more questions?
I think just to reinforce what you said about your audience, being very conscious of the audience. So if, for example, you're doing websites for sub-Saharan Africa, then you've got a problem because the speed of loading things like that is really bad. Or just your page is going to be really clean and simple. And you need to really be conscious of the audience.
Even here, like when I came to England, the 3G connection on my phone is so much slower than it is at home, and I can't load anybody's websites. So I'm like, if you're targeting users in Europe on a mobile app and they don't have Wi-Fi, that page better load super fast. It better be like super slimmed down. but I went to something like 17 sites yesterday and I couldn't get them up on my phone. So that's really, you have to be really cognizant about what people have available to them in different parts of the world.
With that in mind, do you design for different browsers? Do you ever prioritise the browsers you're going to design for first and go for, because we're sort
Yeah.
of dealing with that at the moment, and it's quite a high bandwidth site that we're building, and it's sort of which browsers can cope and how you make those choices. And
Yeah, so what I look at first is I go in my Google Analytics and I see what browsers are people using. It'll tell you right there. So if nobody's using Safari, don't worry about designing for Safari right away.
so if no one's using the one that would be the best performance for your site, you still have
No, you gotta use
still
the other
have
ones
to go
because they're not gonna come on it. So, I know. It's frustrating too, and there's so many different browsers. It used to be
Yeah.
just Internet Explorer designed for that. And now it's like, let's design for 17 browsers.
Yeah.
But Chrome is actually one of the most popular ones now that people are actually using. So that one's a typical one to design for. But if you design for people who are in banks, for example, they're always coming from Internet Explorer.
Well, that's
Always.
the problem one. That's the one that makes the
Yeah,
developers-
old internet. Yeah, so IE just kills everything. Everybody hates
Yeah.
it. But every bank, every large company that has like a really corporate setting to it, they all use IE. So we have to figure out how to design.
Yeah,
Which really stinks. We're like, get with it. But
that's what the
Yeah.
developers say all the time. So it's really
cool. All right.
Brilliant.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.